Many years ago, a man named John Chapman began sowing apple seeds. Over decades and centuries, his seeds grew into an estimated 6 million trees. Chapman, also known as Johnny Appleseed, illustrates Paul's teachings on the relationship between seeds, sowing, and reaping. His life models the principle of working not just for oneself, but for future generations and beneficiaries not immediately known to us. When God entrusts resources to us, He does so not just for our own benefit, but for an increasing harvest of righteousness in our communities and all around the world. The more investments that we thoughtfully and prudently deploy for kingdom purposes, the more profitable the eternal harvest will be. Missional investments grow and multiply themselves, recycling financial resources continually, so that impact is achieved over decades and centuries, not just a single time as most charitable donations do. In the book of Genesis, we're told that God blessed Abraham so that he would be a blessing to others. If that's true for Abraham, it's also true for us. We should know that wealth accumulation we keep for ourselves, or just to pass to our children, unnecessarily limits the flow of such resources to other people and communities that God wants to bless through us. Seeds multiply and grow when they're planted, not when they're kept back and hoarded. And Paul reminds us that he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. God doesn't primarily provide increased financial wealth so that we can build bigger houses or buy more expensive cars. He desires that we use those resources to build His kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. As you learn about God's purposes for blessing us with financial resources, keep in mind the following principles. First, God is both the source and the multiplier of any resources we have, including and especially our financial ones. Second, God has established a covenant funnel through which our gathered resources are released by generously investing into businesses which actively seek to bring the light of Jesus through spiritual, economic, environmental, and social transformation. We can build a portfolio that brings joy to God, us, and humanity if we prioritize the right type of investments. Hopefully, the image of planting trees whose shade you will never sit under is one that compels you to be an active participant in bringing God's blessing through thoughtful, proactive investment choices. Does your heart break for the things that break God's heart? For me and many others I know, God has broken into our worlds and shaken loose our hold on what we think is ours. Our resources are then released for building His kingdom. He does this by breaking our hearts for the things that break His heart. How does this happen? For me, it happened in the midst of listening to a familiar story about Nehemiah one day in my front yard. I felt God opening my eyes to see the needs of His people in desperate situations around the world. Orphans, widows, exploited girls, the many who are starving, trapped in poverty, cut off from the world's rich resources, and the many who've not heard the good news about the love of God in Jesus. For decades, I'd been advising people on how to maximize return, minimize risk, and avoid taxes in order to build a financial safety net around themselves. I valued those principles myself. As I began to see broken and vulnerable people as God sees them, I began to cry, like Nehemiah cried over the broken and vulnerable walls of Jerusalem. These tears have been watering the ground and propelling a sacrificial journey with my family, faith, and funds that, ironically, I never would have experienced had I followed my own advice as a financial advisor. More than ever, I'm moved to live out the command of the Old Testament prophet Micah, who says, "Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with my God." In this section, you'll be challenged to learn about and engage in remediating global suffering and to bring the hope that can only be found in Jesus. While it's an enormous task, we're not free to avoid facing the problem just because it's difficult. As you review the content, consider these 3 ideas. First, how does Nehemiah's reaction to the devastating news about the land and people he loved challenge your own response to news of suffering? Second, how and when are justice and mercy to be applied in response to needs that God shows you? And third, how might your own wealth and resources be preventing you from seeing and engaging in worldwide problems? Maybe by the end of studying this section, you too will pray a dangerous prayer. Let's dive in.